of disease affects the children of the world very strongly. And we realize that there's a lot of delinquency and crime and addiction happening among the children. So if we can get to only one set of solutions in this forthcoming decade, we should focus on the young, because the young are our future. And they know that they are being preyed upon, but they can't exactly put their finger on what it is. And I've had a great deal of success in teaching and learning from children using the information that this program specifically will share with you. And children are all too eager to tell us what is wrong with society and what is wrong with the world. They have a lot to say, a great deal of wisdom, because by being young, they're actually closer to the universal wisdom, closer to the source than, say, an adult is. But there's also those forces out there who are desperate to prevent them from speaking their minds, from saying or relating the wisdom that might take culture up to its next level. And they'd rather infect the mind of the world's children, especially in the West, with all kinds of filth and degeneracy and poison to prevent them from actually relating to us their wisdom. And one of the henchmen or engineers of this kind of control was Aldous Huxley. In his own words, in his book, The Devil's Illusion, he says, "Never before have so few been in a position to make fools, maniacs, or criminals of so many." So through this series, you will have seen that we eloquently inform you that there is various conspiracies operating in the world and have been for some time. We've also put before you the evidence from the horse's mouth that this action is taking place in the world. And again, as in this program, we hope to share with you some very grassroots solutions to empower you to realize that you're not helpless and that we are in an age in which we can turn these situations around. The student of the media, J.A.C. Brown, in his book Techniques of Persuasion, he has something very interesting to say. He says that some authorities take the view that we are all virtually at the mercy of the mass media and baleful methods of group stimulation, whilst others have suggested that brainwashing and similar techniques available to the modern mind manipulator are not only well nigh irresistible, but lead to real and permanent changes in political or religious outlook. If such beliefs are well-founded, the outlook for civilization as we know it is not pleasant to contemplate. So again, many researchers, many scholars aware of how the media specifically operates. But the media has a history. These kinds of machinations that they're using are not new. They just didn't invent it on Madison Avenue. There's an occult underlying history that is very important for us in the modern world to understand. It's not just something coming down from profit-making corporations. Do we own our own thoughts? We had better own them, because if we don't, then somebody else will. Somebody else will own our own thoughts. They're the most precious thing to us. If our thoughts, if our interior world is not sovereign, how can we ever hope to have sovereignty or any kind of stability or security in an external dimension, in a social context? Okay. Meaning corporate advertisers and television producers and artistic directors purveying their business, that there's something very sinister going on. Gerrymander, Jean Baudrillard, the great French philosopher, has spoken about the objectification of human beings, that we are now in such a literally a plastic world, a world of super malls and artificiality, that eventually that's going to impact our nature, our organic, natural relationship with the world might become very artificial because we are surrounded by objects. Might not man also become an object? Brian Wilson Keyes has specifically analyzed the whole subliminal aspect of this, relating to the intelligence of the unconscious mind. Van Packard was one of the very first in the American context back in the 50s, in his book The Hidden Persuaders and the Waste Makers, to first put his finger on the fact that there was tremendous movement, subversive movement in the realm of advertising. And more recently we have Gene Kilborn and Douglas Rushkoff. But of course, when somebody brings up any controversial or fringe subject matter like this, we tend to immediately think, what's the motive? Who is this guy? What's the point? Is he left? Is he right? Is he up? Is he down? Is he insane? What's the point of this critique? What side does he stand on? If he's pointing fingers, from what platform is he pointing the fingers, and who is he pointing it at? This is a normal way that the ego censors truth. It's very important in my work to realize the resistance factor, especially in the work that I do. The resistance factor that will arise naturally and organically. It's part of the skeptical apparatus. However, it can be a little bit inhibiting. It can actually be preventing you from actually realizing truth, but I'm very aware of that. So in the early stages, before we even begin this most controversial of subjects, let me make it very clear that I am not in any way partisan. My interest is purely in the good of humanity. Again, to slowly chip away at the weight and the miasma that surrounds the thinking pattern and the rational process. Man is the rational animal. He is the one who can understand that his thinking may be manipulated. He is the one who can think about thought. And he's the one who can also change the status quo. He can move mountains in a very productive way. It's said that a small light a small match can light up a room full of darkness, but the same amount of darkness cannot extinguish a room full of light. Human beings have a remarkable capacity to heal wounds and change things for the better. And that is my agenda. So in the outset, my motivation is put clearly by Naomi Klein in her book No Logo. She says that NBC aired an investigation of Mattel and Disney just days before Christmas 1996. With the help of hidden cameras, the reporter showed that children in Indonesia and China were working in virtual slavery so that children in America can put frilly dresses on America's favorite doll. She goes on to say that in February 1999, a new report revealed that workers sewing Disney clothes in several Chinese factories were earning as little as 13 cents an hour and were forced to put in hours of overtime. ABC's 2020 program brought back footage of young women locked inside sweatshop factories sewing The Gap, Tommy Hilfiger, and Ralph Lauren. From the National Labor Committee's Toys of Misery report, they say that when you go into a Walmart or a Toys R Us store to purchase Harry Potter or Disney Monsters Incorporated, or Mattel's Barbie, Sesame Street, or Hasbro's Star Wars or Pokemon, do you ever think of the young women in China forced to work 16 hours a day from 8 a.m. to 12 midnight, 7 days a week, 30 days a month for months on end, for wages of 17 cents an hour? Workers forced to work overtime but cheated of their pay? Do you ever imagine women working all day long in 104-degree temperatures, handling toxic glues, paints, and solvents? Women fainting, nauseous, sick to their stomachs? Women housed 16 to a dorm room and trying to get by on 4 hours of sleep a night? Workers whose bodies ache, who are exhausted from racing through the same operations 3,000 times a day, day in and day out? Women who are fired when they get sick? Workers who have no rights, and who, if they try to defend their most basic internationally recognized human and worker rights, will be immediately fired and blacklisted? Workers who are worn out and used up by the time they reach 30 or 35 years of age and are removed to be replaced with another crop of young teenagers? No, of course we don't think of those things. But as I've showed in other programs in this series, we might start to think about it because what the governments of the West do in a foreign context, they're very soon turn around, as history will show you, and start doing in the domestic front. Some of these statements are actually not too far away from us, and many in this country, in America and in England, already suffer in a similar, maybe not as an extreme way, but in a similar way. Naomi Klein says that all 50,000 workers at the Yuyan factory in China would have to work for 19 years to earn what Nike spends on advertising in 1 year. Walmart's annual sales are worth 120 times more than Hayati's entire annual budget. Disney's CEO, Michael Eisner, earns $9,800 an hour, while a Haitian worker earns 28 cents an hour. It would take a Haitian worker 16.8 years to earn Eisner's hourly income. It was at Disney's annual meeting, and about 10,000 shareholders crowded into the arena to rake Michael Eisner over the coals. They were upset that he had paid more than $100 million in a severance package to Hollywood super agent Michael Ovitz, who lasted only 14 scandal-racked months as second in command. Eisner was further attacked for his own $400 million multi-year pay package. That's $400 million multi-year pay package, as well as for stacking the board with friends and paid Disney consultants, for paying starvation wages to workers in overseas factories. As Michael Ovitz said to Mike Rosenfield in an interview, "You don't understand. It's not about money. It's about power and influence." That's right, it is. They're telling you, so let's do it right back to them. The shareholders went in and got something done. You are the shareholder in the future. You are the shareholder of the planet Earth. And you can turn this understanding around. Yes, it is about power and influence. So exercise it. Exercise it with your money. Absolutely refuse to pay these corporations that are flagrantly going to turn around tomorrow. If this is what their philosophy is with foreigners, do you think it's only a matter of time when they inch forward and get more control, more government support, that they're not going to do the same thing to you? So those are my reasons in a nutshell. So who are the real consumers? Well, Anita Roderick, who is the creator of The Body Shop, she says that the language of business is not a language of the soul or the language of humanity. It's a language of indifference. It's a language of separation, secrecy, and hierarchy. Joel Bakan, in his very fine book, The Corporation, says that Chris Hooper, ad director, voiceover artist for McDonald's, Coca-Cola, and many other corporations, says that his job is to create images that are trying to sell products to people that they don't really need, and that encourage very sophomoric behavior, irresponsible, hedonistic, egotistical, narcissistic behavior. Some have even described the Western culture as patently narcissistic. Anyone with an ounce of psychological knowledge or who's bothered to look into the work of the great psychologists of the world. At the turn of this century, they were already talking about this decline morally into gratuitousness and all sorts of narcissistic drives that are replacing the spiritual aspirations of all mankind. Now, Neil McKendrick and John Buer, in their Birth of a Consumer Society, says that the ferocious pursuit of getting and spending has a long history. The feverish pursuit of fashion is just as ancient. But in the past, the acquisitive part of society was a tiny one. Its indomitable pursuit of possessions satisfied more than personal greed and personal whim and extravagances. It served in important social and political functions too, such as the ability to mark the divinity of a king or underline the exclusive status of the nobility or the professional status of lawyers, doctors, and an educated elite. Richard Robbins in Global Problems and the Culture of Capitalism says that by the 1930s, the consumer was well entrenched in the United States, complete with a spiritual framework and an intellectual rationalization that glorified the continued consumption of commodities as personally fulfilling and economically desirable, and a moral imperative that would end poverty and justice. Since that time, the institutions of our society, particularly those of corporate America, have become increasingly more adept at hiding the negative consequences of our patterns of behavior. Consequences such as labor exploitation, environmental damage, poverty, and growing inequalities in the distribution of wealth. We know that from other shows in this series, like Weapons of Mass Deception Behind the New World Order, that the very Constitution itself was put before us in all sorts of flowery language and all the august terminology and the entire embellishment of these documents, and there's not a single human being, apart from the super rich, benefiting from it, 15 minutes later. The taxes are still being brought in, wars are still going on, most of the country's in poverty, child delinquency is rampant, addiction. What good are documents if they have no clout? Well, here they're saying the same thing again. Put before us was all of these ideals of the new commercial state, the new commercial way of things, the benefits of abundance. But who is actually benefiting? John Hoskins, in his book In the Beginning, says that America's corporate plant is the feudal system from the top down. It is ruled by policy, ever-changing policy, a lawless, cruel world as America is now discovering, a world in which political reliability is more important than talent and genius. Everything is whim, everything is negotiable. Workers scheme to get another's job. Anyone can be fired at age 55 for no reason. Maximum output is demanded at the lowest cost. People who work for corporate America develop the defense mechanism of never having an opinion on anything that might be controversial and therefore dangerous. The only thing they will express an opinion over is the weather, the sports, or an agreement.